Hello, everybody, and welcome back to All Things M365 Compliance. I'm Ryan John Murphy, Compliance Lead at Epic Global and Microsoft MVP. And as always, I'm joined by Nikki. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, Ryan. So my name's Nikki Chappell. I'm the Principal Cloud Architect at Cloudway, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP in both security and Microsoft 365 apps and services. We're really glad you are joining us today and talk about all things Microsoft 365 compliance.
Indeed. And we've got a bit of a special one today, haven't we, Nikki? We've got a couple of episodes coming up based on a series of DLP.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about data loss prevention. So this is one of the key things, and it's where really the boundaries cross over between, compliance and security. It's all about that security. We want to make sure our corporate assets, our corporate secrets remain inside our boundaries where we can protect them. So data loss prevention is all about how do we make sure we keep our secrets safe.
Indeed.
So let me share my screen and we'll just talk a little bit about data loss prevention in Microsoft Purview. So data loss prevention is found in the Microsoft Purview Compliance Center. So that's compliance.microsoft.com. So we're in the admin center and we scroll down and we can enter into data loss prevention. So we're into a screen here. So data loss prevention comes in a number of flavors. So Ryan, what types of data loss and what data can we prevent?
Right. So first and foremost, yes, there is a couple of types of DLP, data loss prevention, that Microsoft offer. The main ones are Microsoft 365 DLP. So this is where you would protect items within Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive. You've then got Teams DLP, which obviously speaks for itself. That's where you protect any data in Microsoft Teams. And that can be for scenarios where you have guest or external accounts in there where you don't want sensitive information types to be shared with that type of person. And then you've also got Endpoint DLP. As you can see just underneath where Nikki is at the moment, Endpoint DLP has two ways of being configured. There is this, what Nikki's showing you here, which is your global settings. This is where you can have special types of configuration that apply to the mass majority of the users. And then you've also got the policy and rule set where you define that types of content that should or shouldn't be shared on that particular item. Then you've also got on-premises DLP, which is becoming really, really popular at the moment. But you do need some additional configurations with that, which we'll go through on the advanced episode next week. And you also now have Power BI. So if you're exporting data outside of Power BI, you can protect that data in that remit also. So those are the main types of DLP. Now, when it comes to what you can protect in there, the most common scenarios that Nikki and I see are usually around the sensitive information types, either the default ones that Microsoft offer you or the custom ones that you can create from a business perspective, depending on what your intellectual property is. Then we've also got the protection of sensitivity labels. So if you have, for example, labels that determine internal, confidential internal, highly confidential internal, and those remits, then you can actually put data loss prevention policies in place to say, if you see this being shared outside, then block it in place. It saves you triaging, saves you a lot of noise in the background trying to understand it, and it'll just put an owl out blocking it. Hopefully that explains that well enough, Nikki.
Yeah. And I think if we kind of talk about those kind of sensitive information types, Microsoft have done a lot of work defining what those rules are. How can we describe, looking through all of the content, because Microsoft is scanning our content within your Microsoft 365 environment, what patterns, and then that's what they're looking for is, patterns, regular expressions to try and identify common sorts of sensitive information that you might not want to be shared outside the organization. So this scanning is happening automatically. There's nothing that you can switch on. So when you go into DLP, you're immediately going to be shown some information which you might want to protect. So for example, here it's saying within this test environment I've got, and the numbers are very small because it is just a test environment, that we've got potentially documents that contain medical and health data, information that contains IP, trade secrets, customer account data, financial data, and human resources data. So that's just kind of giving you an indicative approach of what types of data you might have that you want to protect. Now, the key thing to have a look at this is how Microsoft classify it. It's not necessarily going to be accurate to your own environment. So you can go in and you can actually look at some of these detected documents to see if they actually match your needs. I would caveat when you start off with this, don't try and boil the ocean. Pick something that is really critical. Look at your crown jewels, really. What is your most critical data? Find one use case and focus on that. Is either that, or if you're already classifying your content with sensitivity labels, use sensitivity labels as an indicator, because you will need to go through and refine, adapt the scopings really to meet your specific needs.
Indeed. I think this overview page from Microsoft that was introduced a few months ago now, I think this is a really good page for anybody that has DLP already enabled in their environment to come and understand what activities happening inside of your environment. And you can just see there, if you just scroll down a little bit there, please, Nikki, you've got top activities detected, 9 SharePoint, 1 in OneDrive. So in an environment where you have lots and lots of data, I mean, terabytes of data, coming in here and be able to understand, okay, where are my main triggers on the sensitive information types that I've got? But more importantly, where are those locations? And you can see there from the activity in the file, where that file is actually situated. That enables you to provide your security operations center or your triaging team the ability to say, I'm going to take a closer inspection of this particular document. This from Microsoft, I think, is really good. But as you can see, when Nikki clicked on the actions or the items of interest, it actually flipped to the Activity Explorer on the left-hand side. So where you was in overview now comes down into Activity Explorer. Nice work, Microsoft, I think.
Yeah, and it's good. So by default, you're getting this month view. So it's automatically saying, so activity is DLP rule match, and it's giving you that last month view. So if this is a test tenancy, you haven't actually got very much data in there. In a production environment, and particularly a large tenant, you could have a lot of matches. So if you know the timescales that you're looking for, look at adapting that down to, days, if you know it, weeks, etc., because you will get a lot there. So it's useful. You get the information, the rules have been matched. You can select on one, the date. We can see the file. So this was a test file. You can see which user triggered it. And you can see, importantly, which policy. Because in an environment over time, you're going to be taking this crawl, walk, run approach. You're going to start building more and more different policies. And you can see which policy it was actioned by, and you can see the particular rules, etc. So you can see that type of information there. So that allows you to go and dig in, particularly in the early days, because what you might want to do to start off with, and I think it's a fantastic option, is you can set the policies up and just report. So you're not actually going to block anything. What you want to do is say, are my rules right? What you don't want to do is switch some policy on and then stop people sharing all content, because at that point they get very annoyed and then have to sort of roll back. So this gives you this perfect view as you can try out the policies, say, what would it look like when I switch it on in production? You will see all of these rules being matched, but the end user's not impacted. That way you get that opportunity to say, is it right? You can then go and adjust and say, actually, I don't want to block all users. I might want to allow intellectual property information being shared with my external lawyers, for example, because I'm working with them, or for example. So you can start refining, go through looking at this data while you're testing. When you're happy, you can then start rolling it out.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very Very important point, Nikki, to ensure that you don't switch these on straight away. Having them switched on, having them switched off, and being able to understand what matches the DLP triggers and rules are actually giving you, and understanding, okay, maybe this sensitive information type needs a bit of a tweak. Maybe it needs some exclusions put in. One of the most common ones I see is usually around email signatures, where there is either a company number or a VAT number or equivalent tax number, or even telephone numbers that are in your signature are triggering certain types of sensitive information types that Microsoft have given you or you've created yourself. The last thing you want to do is enable that rule set and those triggers prevent from users from either sending that item or even that email, and then you have a bunch of activities that you need to take into consideration by releasing those items. So no, when initially switch them off. Microsoft do give you the opportunity to switch them off with the policy tips as well, which is a very good point. If you want to be able to put policy tips in the DLP rule, so for example, if Nikki's in a document and she types in 50 credit cards and then tries to share it with me as an external person, you can get a policy tip in there to define, hey, are you sure you want to do this because it's an external person? That then also helps the user in the background understand what that DLP policy is for. That then enables you as a DLP admin to refine them and fine tune those policies and rule sets to in accordance with your users and the data that they're using. Excellent.
Yeah, the other thing I think that's useful on this overview page is if you're not that familiar with it, you've got links here. There's a setup guide here that you can follow. You've got all of the official Microsoft documentation, which is very, very good. And if you want to find out what's been happening. So again, if you can select that, and that's just going to go off and just provide you with some prompts about how to set it up. So here's some step-by-step processes to help you get going. So we're not going through this today, but that is really good to look at. Overview, you're planning it, and the planning is really, really important. Need to understand, focus in on that, how you can do the basic configuration, how you can do advanced, and then how you manage the alerts. There's no point in switching on DLP if there's nobody there that's going to maintain it or respond to incorrect information, etc. So that is really, really good. So we're just taking you an overview of what we've got here. So really useful page to just give you just an overview of what you want to do.
Indeed.
So probably want to jump into the policies section.
Let's have a look. Let's have a look indeed. So yeah.
What you actually get is you get a set of defaults. If you're in a new tenant, you do get a set of some example policies that come in. So you may want to use those. You can configure your own policies as well. So anything that you've got will be visible from this policies overview. So here we've got a number of different policies, and we can see the status. We've got these policies up here that have been created, but they're not on. And we've got some policies that are actually on and working in the organization.
Yeah, there's some good default ones there, I think, from Microsoft. The financial one is pretty good. But the two that I like the most, Nikki, are the Teams one, because that gives you the ability straight away to prevent content from being shared in Teams. And with obviously COVID being an issue a couple of years ago, everybody jumping onto Teams, know that's there for your benefit. And then the devices one, but we'll come to those, of course, shortly. So do we have a look at creating a policy and why we need to be careful while creating policies?
Okay, so first of all, we select to create a policy. So you've got two options here. You can create policies based on Microsoft sensitive information types, and we've got them grouped here: enhanced, finance, medical, health, privacy, or you can create your own ones, which are your custom ones. So what should we start off with?
I always use custom, and I don't know if it's a bad habit or it's just a subconscious thing, but I always think custom because I know what my end result needs to be. Okay, and I know what the sensitive information type or even the data that I want to add in here. So My personal choice is to always use custom and custom because it's open for whatever I want it to be able to do.
Yeah. So we select custom and then we're custom. So this is what we call bespoke policy. You define all the rules, whereas these ones above, so for example, if I wanted to choose enhance, I can choose my country and my region, etc. And I'm in the United Kingdom, and we can look at some policies that are related to us. Here we go, PCI DSS, UK financial data. So Microsoft are preceding some of this stuff. But we want to start afresh. Again, I think like you, Ryan, I like to do the custom ones because it's forcing you to think through all the steps, forcing you to think of all the consequences. I think if you look at the other ones, you might miss out on something. Indeed. So we select custom, and next.
So
Step
name
one,
and
we give our policy a name.
Yeah, for sure. Now, just be aware, like sensitivity labels, when you add a name in here, it can't be changed after the fact. So once it's been submitted, the name cannot be changed. But what I always say to people in here in the description is always add as much information as you possibly can. But the very first thing I tell people to do is put the version of what the DLP policy rule set is, because you will always go through a process of refining or fine-tuning that particular policy. Now, if that goes through maybe 4 or 5 different iterations, and you and I was to deploy this now, Nikki, and then somebody else would come in and take over my role because I've been promoted or whatever the case may be, it's always better to do version 1 contains this, version 2 contains this, and then so on and so forth. Certainly helps out. Exactly. Initial configuration.
Yeah, so I mean, I would put like the policy scope and the policy roles. The key thing is not to put too much detail in here. So this, you might say, this is a policy to block all external sharing for things that have a sensitivity label called internal. Exactly. But then you start testing and actually saying, well, actually, there are some scenarios where I'm working with trusted third parties and they are allowed to see that thing's internal. And if you say block all external sharing, well, then you come in and edit it and you're not actually blocking all external sharing, you're blocking most of it, then the name is misleading. So keep it kind of generic. So if you're saying, you're controlling external sharing with mailboxes, controlling external sharing with SharePoint sites, keep it kind of quite a high level there. And as Ryan said, put all of your data in this description because this box can be updated.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So we've done that.
Admin units, I think we're going to go into a little bit more next week.
Yep. So we're just ignoring this. We can just skip over the page and then we're on to the important part. There are lots of different places where we can control. We've got mail, SharePoint sites, OneDrive, Teams, chat and channel messages, devices. Caveat with devices, they need to be managed devices, Defender for cloud apps, on-premise. So for these down, Teams chat, devices, Microsoft Defender for cloud apps, and on-premise, you will need those E5 licenses for that.
Yes.
And so Power BI is a new one that's coming. I think that's also E5 as well. So I think purposes of today, we'll probably look at just some of these more basic ones at the top. We'll look at mail, your files and SharePoint and OneDrive, and some Teams chats.
Yeah, for sure. And just on this as well, while we're in this area here as well, Nikki. So what I often find is that people will turn on everything. Okay, and try and wrap in all of these different workloads into a single policy. Now, that's never a good thing. The reason being is Exchange has its own set of configurations. So does SharePoint and OneDrive, and so does Teams, singled out on their own. And I'm sure the same goes for the rest of the DLP stack, workloads in the stack, okay? So if your end result, or if your DLP policy needs to be structured around just email, just enable the email, Okay, if it is SharePoint or OneDrive, of course, enable them both. They're both the same structure in the background. And if it's Teams, the kicker here is if you're wanting to protect chat, and I'm just talking about wordings in chat, just enable the Teams chat. But if you're wanting to protect files that are being shared in Teams, you also need the SharePoint and OneDrive as well. Now, I'll show you just in a second. So, Nikki, let's do one thing. Let's enable Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive, and just disable Teams for a moment. And then click Next, and let's go through into creating an actual rule.
Oh, so my screen has disappeared. So bear with me. Click the wrong button.
That's all right.
So we create advanced roles. So here we are.
Now, if you select create rule, okay, and if you go to conditions and just expand conditions, right, you can see in here we have a number of objects, okay? Now, if we do one thing, if we cancel that and go back and remove SharePoint and OneDrive, and then go back in and create another rule, look at all these that you now get. This is why I say, always brainstorm or mind map out what your DLP policy is for. A, the workload, B, the execution on the data, the inspection of the data, and then the actual output that you want to achieve. What I've found myself, and I think we touched on this before we started the session, is people go into analysis paralysis with data loss prevention. They start thinking about all these scenarios when they just need to protect a certain type of data and a certain workload. As before, you get people who just enable everything. That's fine, but if you're looking for specifics based on those workloads, just enable that workload. And if you have to have two policies for the same sensitive information type, one for SharePoint and OneDrive, or one for Teams, one for Exchange, fine. It will do the job a lot better than it would do if you just bundle everything together. Look at how many options you've now got there for Exchange.
And I think Exchange is really interesting one, because this is where, you know, you don't necessarily want to block all external sharing. You want to block external sharing with non-trusted partners, for example. So you might be working with your external legal teams, or financial advisors, or other trusted partners that you want. And you might want to be able to collaborate those corporate information with them. So here you can say, well, block external sharing, except if your email address contains either usernames or domain names, etc. You've got that capability, whereby if you bundled this in with SharePoint, you can't have that, because a file doesn't have an email address associated with it.
Indeed, absolutely. And that's a very, very good point, because as I say, not to labor the point, is understand what is my DLP doing against which workload and what is the outcome that I want. Now, just be cautious. If you do in the actions place a block on the email, it gets blocked in place. Okay, and what I mean by that is, and we'll probably show you in a minute, is if that email is in Outlook and I press send and the conditions to that email are a block, the email would not go through the transit pipeline. It will literally be blocked in the application. Now, why does Microsoft do that? They do it for two particular reasons. The main one being it reduces the noise when it comes to triaging. The last thing you want to be doing is going through nonsensical triaging reports. Now, if that's a block in place, it doesn't create any report whatsoever. So just be aware of that. And you would only want to use that block in a very, very unique scenario. I mean, I've probably only used it once throughout my lifespan of working with DLP. However, there's an alternate solution. You can actually send the item to quarantine, where it can then be released after a review. So if that's what you're looking for based on the scenario Nikki's just given, you have the block, which is an all-out block with no alerting, or a quarantine. That quarantine goes into a folder. You can then go into the alert and then release the email from there. So these are the conditions that you would get only if Exchange is enabled. Excellent. Shall we build one out for labels, Nikki? That seems
Yeah,
the more
that's good.
common one that I use.
Okay, let's do sensitivity labels. I can't spell.
You always manage to misspell when you're pressured, don't you?
Just for the purpose of this, again, put a useful description in it. You know, describe what your conditions are, what your actions are in here, just to make it nice and user friendly. So then we go down into our conditions. What is our condition?
Content contains,
and then
you get this box here. Now, one thing to know on this particular box here, Nikki, sorry to cut you off there, is on the right-hand side where you've got group operator, okay? Now, this is any of these or all of these. Now, be cautious if you're wanting to have a number of elements or conditions mapped into a single value, then this box on the right-hand side will give you all of these or any of these, okay? I have noticed on some occasions, any of these is flipped to all of these. Now, it doesn't happen a lot, but I have noticed every now and again, all of these is the main operator there. So just be sure when you come into here, the group operator is exactly what you're wanting it to do. There you go. Yeah, thanks, Nikki.
And the other thing that you can do, as well as those ands or ors, you can create groups. So you can, the groups effectively are your nested conditions. So you think if you were to describe this and you would write it down, you would put brackets around it. You say condition A or condition B, bracket, and so it might be sensitivity label A and sensitivity or sensitivity label B, because you're never going to get an and. You can only have one label on a piece of content, so that would have to be an and. You'd group that together and then say and then you might have another condition. Content contains a, this is top secret information, for example. So you kind of build those rules out.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, so if you go to and now on the, you've already got that in, actually, Nikki.
Yeah, content contains.
Yeah, and then if we just go to...
Now, I'll just delete one of them.
That's okay, no worries. And then go to add, and then you've got sensitivity labels, and then sensor information types.
Here we go.
So here's all the labels that's available in Nikki's environment. So if we pick one just at random, Nikki.
I think I've probably got one restricted data, for example.
Yeah, restricted data. Okay, so if we in this scenario want to say, if any labels, any documents, any items that have restricted data applied to it, we don't want that to go out of the environment because it's restricted data. So that should only be visible to the users inside of 365. So if you just click on condition again for me, Nikki. Yep. Yeah, just a new one there, please. Fine. All right. So now you've got content is shared from Microsoft 365, which is the fourth one down. So if we're wanting this to be prevented from going outside, you need to do exactly what Nikki's just done there. Select the content is shared from Microsoft 365, pull the drop-down box and ensure that with people outside my organization is selected. Now we can move on to the action. And under the action, we've got the very top one where it says restrict access or encrypt the content in Microsoft 365 locations. Now you get this box. Now, by default, the second one is selected, but Microsoft now gives you a third option of encrypt email messages applies to content in Exchange, okay? So, of course, if it was SharePoint or OneDrive that you had mapped into here, this wouldn't work. But because we've specifically picked Exchange as a workload, because we know that's the end result that we're looking for, we're able to choose this. But for this demo today, we're only going to choose block only people outside of your organization. So we've got sensitivity label mapped in as a condition, another condition of if it's shared outside, and we've now got an action to say block it, completely block this email. So what that will do is that email will basically come up with a policy tip, which we'll show you in just a moment, and block it at the point of send. Here we've also got user notifications. Now, if you just select on there, please, Nikki. Right, in here we've got a couple of options. We've got Email notification. So once this particular rule is triggered, the user, say if Nikki triggers it now, Nikki will get an email and basically stating out whatever the customized texting that you've got in here. And the two options there are customize the email text and customize the email subject. So you as an organization, you can add in HTML content in there. So you can have your business logo. You can have links in there as well, helpful links, Nikki, are based on your data protection mechanisms inside of whatever organization that you're working in. And then you've got, below that, you've got policy tips. Now, I'm a big fan of policy tips because the first and foremost thing is, if there's a policy tip there, you as a user is going to read it because it basically comes up in Outlook, okay? Once you start reading through that, you're able to understand why that DLP policy is in place. More importantly, you'll be able to understand the actual sensitive data that you're dealing with and whom you may be sharing that to. At that point, it might actually tell you, oh, I've got the wrong label against this, or this is the wrong person. It's the right name, but it's the wrong person outside of my organization. We often see that a lot with data exfiltration. It's the right name, but it's the wrong person in the organization or outside of your organization that you're sending it to. Having this policy tip here is essential for them to understand what's happening with the data that they've got and the recipient that they're going to. So that's a really good tip from me. Excuse the pun. They've also got provider compliance URL here as well. So again, you can have that come up in the policy tip. Rather than getting an email after the fact that they triggered the alert, you can provide the same email in the policy tip. I can just copy and paste the URL, I'll click on the hyperlink, and away it goes. It will open up and I've got something to read and understand. Perfect. We've also got user overrides. Now, be careful with your overrides, okay? If there's ever a remit where you want people to be able to send that data, don't include them in the policy. Don't include them in the rule. So let's take, for example, if you're using a sensitive information type of credit card, okay? Now, me as an IT person, I shouldn't be sending any credit cards at all. So I want to be in a policy that prevents me from sending anything to external, okay? But Nikki may be in a very different scenario. Nikki may be in an area where that she needs to send credit cards. Maybe she's working in finance, or maybe she's working in HR, in the payroll. So what we would do there, what we would recommend there is to have a scoping of maybe 0 to 50, okay? Where you can send them without any problem, because that's what your department does. That's part of your workload. But 50 to 100, okay, we're still going to prevent you from doing it, but we're going to put an override on for you. Because there may be a valid reason why you do that. Maybe once a quarter you push out pay slips or whatever the case may be to whomever, or maybe there's a recording of purchases across that quarter. Here is where you would add that override. Now, the very first thing you've got there is require a business justification to override. It works exactly the same as sensitivity labels, where you have to provide a justification to send that data out. I always tell customers where there's an override in, you want to be able to understand that justification. If that justification is valid and it's a repetitive thing, maybe you can up the account of how many sensitive information types that they can send. If it's not, at least you know at that point why that user's made that choice to send that data. You've got the justification for it, of course.
And I think particularly in the early days, you're likely to get a higher volume of these because these policies will need tweaking and adapting. This information about the business justification is being captured. So where we looked earlier on, we could see the triggers, what's being triggered in that activity explorer. You can then go in, have a look and say, well, why are people overriding them? You know which person, so you can always go and follow up with them and their department, find out what their use case is. And as Ryan said, you may want to put them into a different policy that has a different set of rules because they could have a valid reason for it. What you don't want to be doing is every time somebody needs to do that action, they have to override all the time. So this is this real fine balance between productivity and security. It's better to split out those policies, look at those different personas. So look at those different persona groups and actually say it's an 80-20 rule. 80% of the people we're going to block. As Ryan said, I've no need to be dealing with volumes of credit card data, but you are going to get 20% or 10% or 5% where they've got that valid justification. So think about mapping out and planning when you implement this.
Yeah, indeed. Very, very good point. Well made. So next we've got incident report. So first thing on here is, what severity is this rule? Okay, so Microsoft give you the obvious ones of low, medium, and high. Now, if this is a DLP policy that you want to be able to map inside a risk, it must be set to high. Okay, if it's anything else that you're not wanting to map into inside a risk management, look at the value of the intellectual property that you've got and look at the destination of where that data is going to, and then make a decision based on that. If it's just for monitoring, we have customers that use DLP just for monitoring particular activities, set it to low, because then it gives you the opportunity then to understand, okay, I can look at this whenever I need to, or whenever there's a particular scenario played out. If it's got actions in it, and it is a medium level of intellectual property or medium level of sensitive information type, mark it as medium. Okay. Now, for me, my purpose, because this is a block, I would mark this as a medium because I know that data is not going to be able to leave the environment. If there was overrides in, as what Nikki was saying before, then you might want to set that to a high. That then gives you the instinctive or the subconsciousness when that comes through, okay, I need to take a look at this rapid because it's set to high. All right. Next, you've got send an alert to admins. Just scroll up a tiny bit. Sorry, Nikki. Yeah. When a match occurs. Okay. Now, you've got an option there to add or remove user groups. Okay. Add your security operations center into there, or add the users that are basically on that in that particular grouping. So you have many different naming conventions for the distribution list that you use. Everybody in that, or whomever in your environment, needs to be aware of what's just happened. You can map them in easily enough here. You've also got just below there, send an alert every time an activity matches. Again, if this is a low level alert and you don't need to be alerted every single time this happens and you just want it once a week, and on a Friday morning, you just want to be able to go through it, or even on a Monday morning, you want to be able to go through it, bundle it up. Make that triaging process for yourself a lot easier. And if you're getting them once a week, and because they're only a low, great. You're not getting swamped with information that's not relevant at that time. If it's a medium or a high, depending again on what the intellectual property is inside of the DLP rule and who the recipient is, you may want to set that to as soon as it happens. Because in most cases with DLP, you want to know as soon as it happens. Then we've got use incident reports to notify when a policy match occurs. Just switch that to on for me, please, Nikki. Right, now, this is important, okay? If this is a SharePoint site or a OneDrive site, you've got this site admin already mapped into there. You might not want that data to go to that site admin. So I always tell people, whatever individuals need to be mapped into the notifications, map them in and remove the site admin out. I am not too sure why Microsoft add the site admin in. However, I have asked, and if I do get an answer, then obviously I'll share it in the next grouping. So you obviously want the people in there that need to be notified of this. Okay, below that, you've got 5 boxes that are ticked. The last 2 are very, very important for you to understand, okay? The last 2 essentially send the content that match the rule, including the surrounding text, and the item containing the content that match the rule. I have had in some scenarios where first responders shouldn't be privy to the data that's in there. They're only there to ensure that any high alerts are looked at first and foremost and then passed on to a tier 2 team or another team. So if you have a managed service in place and they're doing your first responding for you, you might not want the bottom 2 on, because that literally gives away the data. Okay, so just be cautious of that. We've had a lot of customers, in my experience at Microsoft and here at Epic, that have basically gone on and enabled everything, thinking that they want everything, and then realize it's an overexposure because they're using a managed service, or their first responder team, first line support team shouldn't have access or shouldn't be privy to that particular information. The first 3 are fine. Okay, then you've got additional options. So if there's a number of rules that make up a policy, And what you want to do is essentially say, well, if the first two rules are basically low and medium and then a high, and the medium one triggers, there's no need for it to go down into the high rule because you've already got your trigger. Okay. Having this put into, if there's a match for this rule, stop processing additional DLP policies and rules, saves time essentially, but also saves the noise in the background. Okay. And again, if you've got multiple rules under the same policy, you've got a priority there. Always ensure it's least to max. That way it can go through the policies and the rules inside of the policy to ensure it covered off every scenario that you want to cover off with your intellectual property from a business requirements perspective. And that's essentially how you build out a rule for exchange.
Mm-hmm. So we'll cancel out of this and we can have a look at some that have been created before. So let me have a look what this one is. So this is a policy that was created a little while ago. So it's saying it's talking about blocking external sharing, and it's going to block SharePoint and OneDrive based on the sensitivity labels, just as we were describing. So we go through next. SharePoint and OneDrive. Again, we're going to be looking. Yeah. And here, I've only got, it's just one simple rule on this one. If you've got multiple rules, so as Ryan said, if you've got that, if it's only between 1 and 3 credit cards or 3 and 10 credit cards or 20, you would have the multiple rules here. This one here, if we expect it here, if we open it up, it gives you a nice little summary of what you're doing. So content contains restricted data, all employees, or protected all employees. So this is saying if you've got one of those two labels and content is shared with people outside of the organization, we want to notify people with a policy tip, we want to restrict access, and we want to send alerts to an administrator. So this is just a nice little way where you can actually see a summary of your role. You can actually then go in and actually have a look. This is the really important thing. Yeah. Is this one is switched on, but don't do that. First of all, test it out first. Yeah. Test it out first without policy tips, I would say. So first of all, your first testing is going to be your IT, your compliance team. So you want to test it out first. So you want to run this in the background, run it for a week or so, for however long, depending on how frequently the rules are being impacted. And it's going to add all of the alerts to that activity viewer. So it's not going to impact the end users. We can go in and have a look and see if we need it adjusted. Once you've adjusted it, you might say, actually, I'm ready to test with a group of users. Might not be the whole organization. Scope those users in and then start showing them the policy tips. And then they can feedback to you to actually say, actually, I'm getting a lot of policy tips for genuine information files I'm sharing, emails, etc. So then again, you're going to go through another process of refining it. Once you're happy with that, then you can turn it on. You can turn it on for either, again, a group of users or all users in the organization. It's really important that you go through these steps and you don't just say, hey, I think this is right, switch on. Otherwise, you are going to have unexpected consequences.
Yes. You do not want that. Let me tell you, you really don't want that. I had a customer when I was working elsewhere, I'll say, and we had a customer do this, create a number of DLP policies, switch them on, and the amount of noise that they got from a service desk because people weren't able to send or share things, you do not want that on your conscience. And as Nikki said, very important point, create a very closed audience initially when you're doing this to test, especially if you're doing this in production, you don't have the ability to use a test environment. Keep it very, very small. Maybe yourself and a couple of other IT admins just to see what the look and feel of the DLP policy is. Is it the expected outcome that you're wanting? And then start to increase that population inside of that policy. Microsoft does give you the opportunity to add exclusions in there as well. So if this is an all company type of policy, but there's a couple of people that you don't want this to be included to, you can usually exclude at the point of creating the policy as well. So you have that flexibility when it comes to DLP. Awesome. I think we're right on time as well, aren't we, Nikki?
I think so, yeah. So that was just kind of an overview of how we actually configure those policies. So I think, you know, this is very much like a lot of the other compliance products. You need to take time with your business stakeholders also to understand your personas. You also need to take time with those that are defining the rules, the compliance teams, the legal teams, GDPR, your security teams, etc., to define the rule set. You want to know the scope, the personas, the rules. Do that even before you get anywhere near this solution, and then find a simple use case to try it out, and then you're building it. It's going to be an iterative process. It's not going to be something where, you know, I've had scenarios where companies come to me, we need DLP. And you can't, it's not something, it's not just a button you switch on. It's not not like, say, kind of, for example, like we want to configure MFA, which is a relatively simple thing. There are so many business decisions to make. So you really got to get that right to get the value of this.
Agreed. Absolutely. Perfect. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. We will have another episode which will go through some more advanced configurations with DLP, especially around those nested groups that Nikki clicked onto before. So stay with us and we'll get that out to you as soon as possible. And if you have liked this episode or any other episode, give us a like, give us a subscription, and share it around everybody else. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Goodbye.